These are some powerful principles that help people understand what environmental justice is and how do we work together to address environmental injustice, especially impacting Black, Brown, and Indigenous neighborhoods. Next, I want to talk about these elements that undergird a commitment to racial equity and mobility justice. And it reflects on ensuring that our work on racial equity and mobility justice is transformative to people who need the transformation the most. The first element I want to talk about is community ownership of the transportation planning process. The central question is, who should own the planning process? Should it be an NPO? Should it be a DOT? Should it be a white-led transportation advocacy organization? Or should it be Black and Brown people who live in the neighborhoods where the transportation projects are coming to? Should it be community-based organizations who operate in these same neighborhoods? Our position is that the transportation planning process happening in our neighborhoods must be owned by people, the stakeholders, and the CBOs that live and work in our neighborhoods every day. This is required. It is necessary to ensure that transportation does not continue to harm our neighborhoods, and we're benefiting from these transportation planning, the planning processes and the transportation projects that come as a result. The people in our cities and in our neighborhoods that are the best positioned to remove racialized inequities are those who are experiencing the most severest of the inequities. In our country, this is Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. We understand our needs, and we also have an idea of what solutions may work in our neighborhoods. And when the ownership sits with agencies, we don't have the opportunity to ensure that these projects are transformative. So this is a tectonic shift away from how the transportation sector works today. And I'm not suggesting that this process is going to be easy. I'm also not suggesting that we box out the NPOs or the DOTs or other agencies. Governmental agencies have something to bring to the table. Those agencies have financial resources, they have technical expertise, and they also have parameters. We can't just do anything we want to do with a bike lane or a new sidewalk. We need the financial resources, we need the technical expertise, and we need the parameters. However, we stand by our position that it must be owned by community-based organizations, people, and stakeholders in the neighborhood. The next critical element I want to talk about here is racially equitable traffic safety. I imagine Denver is similarly situated like Chicago with some of the things I'm about to say, so this may not come as a surprise to you all. Here in Chicago, we executed our mobility justice in Chicago research. And in that research, we did a series of focus groups targeting Black, Brown, low to moderate income people living on the south and west side of Chicago. And there were two powerful findings that came out of the research, among many. One was that about 75% of focus group attendees said transportation was a barrier to getting and or keeping a job. The second finding was the degree to which Black and Brown people expressed deep concerns around violence, and those concerns shape their mode choice. In essence, Black and Brown people feel compelled to own a car because of their concerns for interpersonal violence, vehicular violence, and police violence. Not to mention the other societal headwinds Black and Brown people face in our society, one that is embedded with structural racism and white supremacy. So what does that mean? What does it mean to know that Black people are owning cars because of their concerns for violence and all three types of violence: interpersonal, vehicular, and police? How do we go about addressing these concerns? We know in most mid to large size cities, traffic violence is adversely impacting predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. Is the solution Vision Zero, which I suspect is true in Denver, is leading with an enforcement strategy? And oftentimes, in most cities across the country, there's no real resources to re-engineer our streets, to offer a compelling contextual and cultural educational campaign, which leaves us an enforcement strategy, rather police or automated. Our work here on racially equitable traffic safety is suggesting that we must prioritize how to achieve reduced traffic violence, how to achieve increased mobility for racially marginalized communities without the harms of police enforcement and automated enforcement. We know what those harms look like. We've seen it. We just went through not only a global pandemic, we also went through a racial justice reckoning in our society and across the world as a result of continued police violence. Racially equitable traffic safety is reflecting this commitment to reducing traffic violence in a way that's racially equitable and racially just. Some of the things that we're paying attention to and we're focused on, and I encourage you all to wrestle with as well, is banning police departments from doing pretextual stops, banning police departments from issuing bicycle tickets, jaywalking tickets, decriminalizing public transit fare evasion, and investing equitably in re-engineering our streets. Our position here is, what's implied in our position here is that the root cause of traffic violence is structural racism. And the condition of our streets is a result of structural racism. The poorly engineered streets in our neighborhoods and across our cities is a result of structural racism. So not only must we actively dismantle structural racism, we must focus on re-engineering our streets in a way that forces people to drive safer. The next element I want to talk about is our work on community mobility rituals. Now, this is not new work. I'm sure that you all have organizations in Denver that are doing similar work to this. What we did was we codified this work. Community mobility rituals for Equiticity includes 5 mobility events: community bicycle rides, neighborhood walking tours, public transit excursions, group scooteros, and cyclovia-style open streets festivals. So some may ask, why call these rituals? You know, organizations across the country are organizing rides. There's Critical Mass and Red Bike and Green, there's Slow Road Detroit. There's organizations all across the country that are organizing rides. There's organizations that's offering walking tours and things of that nature. So why are you all calling these rituals? Because there's 7 elements that these mobility events, what we call community mobility rituals, have in common that lend themselves to being ritualistic. And I just want to quickly talk about some of those 7 elements. One, and it is the most important one, is a rhythmic schedule. When the schedule is rhythmic and it's easily understood, people begin to fit their lifestyle into the rhythm of the ritual. For example, here in Chicago, in the neighborhood where we're based, North Lawndale, on the west side of Chicago, we do a Friday night ride series where we ride every Friday night. Now, this is Chicago, so we ride from about May to October. We ride weekly, every Friday night. And it's easy to understand. Should it be a Friday, we're going to ride bikes. That allows people to begin to fit their lifestyle into coming out every Friday night. We also do a weekly walk series. Every Sunday morning here in this neighborhood, we are doing a neighborhood walking tour. And people who love to walk, love to learn more about our neighborhoods begin to come out every Sunday. That is critical because when more and more people are coming out on a regular basis, the rhythm is known, it's easy to understand, there's a schedule, there's a rhythm to it. What happens is people begin to socialize. When they first show up, they don't know anybody. Now they recognize faces. A few times later, they may learn names. A few times later, they may start to conversate. Then they're exchanging numbers. They're texting each other outside of the rituals. It's the socialization that happens as a part of the ritual that is so powerful. And there's research that shows when social cohesion or collective efficacy or trust goes up in neighborhoods, people are less concerned about violence. And remember, going back to our research, the deep concerns we have around violence are so significant, they shape our mode of choice. This research is saying these rituals contribute to people having less concerns about violence because they feel a sense of collectivism, a sense of trust among people who they now have these relationships with. And when people's concerns around violence goes down and people's levels of trust go up, what happens is they are more likely to walk and bike and shop and visit the parks and otherwise explore our neighborhoods versus hopping in a car and driving miles outside of our neighborhood to do some of those same activities. These types of excursions at the hyperlocal level help make our streets more vibrant. When our streets are more vibrant, when there's more energy, more people, more relationships, more activities happening on our street, we will have an impact on reducing violence. And this is critical. That's why that rhythmic schedule, because all of it starts with a rhythmic schedule that's easy for people to understand and allows them to fit their lifestyle into the schedule. I'm going to just breeze through the rest here. Number 2 is a priority on socialization. Not only do we want people who are participating in the ritual to socialize, we also want to create a two-way conversation with people who are watching from the sidewalks or the bus stops or the train station or the porches or the windows. We want to create a two-way conversation so that people are socializing throughout the ritual. Number 3 is racialized healing. Our primary audience is Black and brown people who are in the neighborhood, who live in the neighborhood where the rituals are taking place. And it's our people, it's Black and brown people who struggle the most with healthcare inequities. This is an act of racialized healing because during the act of walking or the act of riding a bike, that's a form of exercise. And given high rates of, not only high rates, adversely high and inequitable rates of heart disease, certain forms of cancer, obesity, mental illness that's happening in Black and brown neighborhoods, this is an act of racialized healing. Number 4 is reduced barriers to participation. We do not want people to have a reason not to participate in our rituals. So for example, when we do our community bicycle rides, oftentimes our bike share system here in Chicago will come out and bring bikes. So not having a bike is not a reason to not participate. We don't want, someone not having a bike as a barrier to them joining with us. For our walks, it's a slow pace. The distance that we walk is manageable. So even those who are not in the best of health feel comfortable that they're able to come to a neighborhood walking tour and it'll be accessible for them. Number 5, shared customs. We like to create naturally shared customs that people who are participating in our rituals are able to, use among ourselves to help cement social bonds. So I'll just give you a quick example. Here in North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago, when we're doing our rides, the way we greet people is a right fist in the air. So as we're riding, we'll say, "Hey, how you doing?" And we'll put a right fist in the air. And we've been doing these rides for several years here in North London, and again, they're every Friday night. So this is sort of encapsulated our neighborhood. So now I could be walking around the neighborhood, or I could be driving around the neighborhood, and every time I see somebody, I'm putting the right fist in the air, and I'm getting that in return. Don't underestimate the power of these shared customs, because they help cement social bonds. And these shared customs, it could be a movement, a greeting, it could be a call and response. We also do some call and response on our rides. So all of those things are shared customs. Number 6 is the active disruption of the status quo. What we're talking about here is an acknowledgement to ourselves and others that the status quo in our society is harmful for Black, brown, and indigenous people. And we're not accepting the status quo. We're going to push back on it. We're going to express our power against the status quo. So for example, when we're riding bikes in the neighborhood, sometimes we'll say, take the street, and we fan out and we take the entire street. And now we are disrupting the status quo. We're sending a message to ourselves and others that we have the potential to transform ourselves, our neighborhoods, and our cities. We are disrupting the status quo. And the final one of this, what we call 7 elements of street rhythm, these are why we call our mobility events community mobility rituals, is the hyper-local collective ownership of our space. What this means is that it goes back to that earlier point I talked about around who should own the planning process. So this is another way of expressing our ownership of the planning process, and it goes further. It's us telling ourselves that we have the potential to transform our neighborhoods, create safe spaces. For example, oftentimes in predominantly Black neighborhoods or brown or indigenous neighborhoods, we may not feel comfortable going to a park. When we stake claim, when we own a park, we're saying to the neighborhood that the park is safe. And we want our entire community to partake in this beautiful resource. So that final one is hyper-local collective ownership of our space. I'm going to continue here. Get back. All right, so that's just a little bit about our community mobility rituals. Now I want to talk about neighborhood mobility hubs. This is a concept that was born in Europe, is popular in Germany, and it's over the last probably decade or so, it's started to become more and more popular in the US. We love this concept. We're working on something called the Go Hub, which we call a community mobility center, similar to a neighborhood mobility hub. What's beautiful about neighborhood mobility hubs is that these types of strategies are hyper-local in nature. You know, one of the challenges with the transportation sector, especially as it relates to Black, brown, and indigenous people, is this belief that a one-size-fits-all model is going to work in every neighborhood. It does not. The neighborhood mobility hub allows us the opportunity to create a model to increase mobility at the hyper-local level for a specific target audience. And that mobility hub is shaped in a way that it's addressing their needs. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's not a mobility hub that you could plop in any neighborhood and it operates the same. It is taking the feedback, taking the problems, the challenges, potential solutions from people in the neighborhood and designing a neighborhood mobility hub to meet their needs. The traditional model is mostly simply hyper-concentrating mobility devices adjacent to transit in a tight geography. That could be an intersection or a parking lot, and it's, again, right next to transit. And that traditional model is normally asking mobility operators to bring their devices to bear on that tight geography. So the scooter operators are stationing scooters, bike share operators are bringing their bikes, Uber and Lyft may be creating some space for their drivers to wait for their next clients. Shared electric vehicle providers have space for charging stations, all of it is right there together. That's the traditional model. One of the challenges with that model is that the relationship has to exist outside, and often the relationship is only with the technology, it's not with people. The other challenge with that model, especially with respect to Black and brown people, is that the operators are charging what they normally charge. And that's a model that we struggle with, this idea that we are going to have an impact on increasing mobility, and Black and brown people have to pay to increase their mobility. So our vision on the Go Hub, similar to a neighborhood mobility hub, takes a different approach. We take that model of hyper-concentrating mobility devices, and we layer on top of that model software. Our software, as I talked about a moment ago, our community mobility rituals, a hyperlocal advocacy coalition, and trauma-informed programming, going back to our deep concerns around violence. That's our software. And then we bring hardware and software together in a physical building. The physical building is critical because we have to have some safe and protective space for Black and brown people to address their trauma. We can't leave it to them just figuring it out on their own. So we're working with healthcare providers to come into the Go Hub and have a space for group counseling and therapy, and allowing people to heal from the trauma that we experience. The next one I want to talk about is correcting the spatial mismatch between job seekers and job centers. Now, some will say, this is not a problem for the transportation sector. This is a problem for land use, the land use sector, or the land use planners. That's what has contributed to the spatial mismatch. That's not something we subscribe to. There's monuments to structural racism in our society. And you know what we call those monuments today? Highways. Who built the highways? The transportation sector built those highways. And not only did they build the highways, the transportation sector was chasing white people into the suburbs. They were chasing them with their public transit. They were chasing them with their highways. They were chasing them with all other types of amenities and resources, as white people in droves left a lot of our urban core in our cities across the country. So transportation has contributed to the problem of a spatial mismatch, and now wants to throw up his hands and say, no, this is a land use problem. Transportation has a role in repairing the harms that came as a result. So how do we fix this now? Should we improve our land use policies? That could take decades to have an impact. So how do we fix the spatial mismatch between job seekers and job centers today? The most effective strategy to make that, to fix that, is public transit. Is public transit that is responsive to the most racially marginalized people in our cities, the poorest people in our cities, the most socially marginalized people in our cities. Who are the people who have little option? We don't have the ability to hop in an Uber every time we need to get somewhere, or pay for a taxi, or figure, work from home should we want to. COVID taught us this. Who are the people who are the most dependent on public transit? Who are the people who are working the overnight shifts out in the suburbs somewhere? Oftentimes, that's Black, brown, and indigenous people. And one of the most significant of solutions that we can employ to correct for this spatial mismatch is public transit. We got to be creative. We could think about some shuttle systems. We can make sure that the connections are there. When someone is taking a train and has to catch a bus, make sure that the timing is right. We need agencies in the region to communicate and make sure that those connections are there for people. Transit is the answer to addressing that spatial mismatch between job centers and job seekers. Now, I want to talk about the importance of legislating. We do not subscribe to the idea of leaving a commitment to racial equity to people with good hearts. Good hearts come and go. Warm bodies come and go. Shifting political winds come and go. Awkward handshakes and goofy smiles come and go. We don't leave a commitment to racial equity to people with good hearts. We legislate that commitment. We policy that commitment because we're more confident that when it's policied and legislated, it's more durable and it's more long lasting. When someone is making the decision to commit to racial equity, when they leave, often the commitment leaves with them. So we like to say, burn it down and build anew. We do not believe systems which harm us have an inherent right to exist. Should they have the capacity to be transformed, we will work with those systems. Should they be beyond repair, we will destroy those systems and build new systems which nourish Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. One of my favorite people is Marlo Stanfield from HBO's The Wire. And he once said, "You want it to be one way, but it's the other way." What happens when we turn on the power and equity moves like electricity through our homes, our streets, our neighborhoods, and our cities? Equiticity. Power plus equity is greater than. Now turn on the power and let equity flow. Thank you all. Just a couple of quick things, and then we're going to have a closing video for you. We are going to share some follow-up information. It'll include some slides, some links to those 3 foundational frameworks that I mentioned, and some additional resources. Erica and Stuart will get these, and they'll be sharing these with you all. So now we'd like to go to a closing video, and I am happy to have some discussion, take some questions, and let's talk it through. I am the founding president and CEO of the Equiticity Racial Equity Movement. We are operationalizing racial equity by harnessing our collective power through research, advocacy, programs, and community mobility rituals to improve our neighborhoods and improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people.
So we're planning on just like moving a mic to whoever has the question.
They will have the potential to reduce violence in our neighborhoods. When there's a limited frequency, that helps trust grow at the neighborhood level. When trust goes up in the neighborhood, the perception of violence goes down. When the perception of violence goes down, more people are willing to walk and shop. And when our streets are more violent, we will have the potential of reducing violence in our neighborhood. This is why we exist. This is why we work. This
we weren't able to get lights, obviously. But during the break, we're going to have some podcasts.
All right. Let's go, Denver. What y'all got for me?
Sorry about that. Beautiful location. Thanks for. Okay. Autoplay.
Okay, so I think we have a sort of a technological 2-part process here, because I don't think you, Mr. Reed, can hear questions from the audience. So we'll get questions from the audience, and then I'll repeat them back to you on this tiny little screen here, and then you'll pretend that you heard them in the first place. So you can hear me right now?
Yes, I hear you great.
Okay, so taking questions from the audience. Do we have microphones out in the audience?
No.
No.
So here's one for you,
Oh,
because I just have to repeat it to
Oh,
him
Sure.
at this
So I'll
range.
bring it to whoever's got a question,
There you go.
and
Perfect.
then you'll be able to hear it, right?
Yeah.
I can just speak loudly, that's fine. My name is Rebecca, I work at the Rescue. I'm just curious to know in what ways you've been able to engage individuals who are experiencing disabilities with your work.
Great question. So you did not hear that, correct?
I did not.
Okay, so the question was asked from someone focused on disability rights and wanted to know to what degree your work is able to incorporate folks with disabilities into the enterprise you're engaged in.
Sure, I appreciate that question. So first I should share, as an organization, our focus is on racial equity. That's our focus. We're focused on improving life outcomes for marginalized, racially marginalized communities in our country. That's Black, Brown, and Indigenous. Now, that does not mean we don't intersect with other types of equity. We certainly do. I co-chair the Transportation Equity Network here in Chicago, which focuses on both racial equity, mobility justice, environmental justice, disability justice. All of that work is coming as a part of that work. I'm also on the steering committee of the Transportation Equity Caucus, which is chaired both by PolicyLink and by the National Center for Disability Rights. Dara Baldwin, who the individual who asked that question may know Dara Baldwin, based in DC, is a powerhouse on disability rights and disability mobility justice, transportation justice, and disability justice. So certainly it intersects, and I'll say this as well, whenever there's a focus on equity and justice for the most marginalized in our society, oftentimes other groups will benefit from it. So while we're focused on racial equity, I anticipate, especially racially marginalized people that also intersect with the disability community, will benefit from that work. And I trust that's the same for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Next question. I don't know who has a mic. Grace, you want to?
Sure. You want to ask how receptive?
Stand up so they can hear
I would like to ask, oh, good, here you go. Good morning, thank you. I would like to ask, how receptive has the city administration been to your efforts to be involved in transportation planning?
you. Great question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I did hear that one. So that's yeah, you got me on that one. So here's the deal. We are a racial equity movement. We were founded about 5 years ago. We are unwilling to be silent in the face of structural racism. And we are pushing the city, the state, the region to do more to positively impact Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in our society. So there's this dance that's happening, that's always happening between Equiticity and government agencies. I'm invited to be in these rooms through my co-chairmanship of the Transportation Equity Network. We work closely with the City of Chicago's Department of Transportation to embed racial equity and mobility justice into their strategic plan. I'm on our MPO's Regional Economy Committee. So I'm at the table and I'm doing my part to ensure that they're operationalizing racial equity or pushing them to operationalize racial equity, while also ensuring that my voice is there, people are listening, people are hearing from a perspective like mine. It's not too often being shared in these rooms. Sometimes we don't see it eye to eye, and sometimes that gets public, sometimes it gets testy. However, what I will say about both the administration at the state level in Illinois and at the city level here in Chicago is that they have been open to my critique and have been open to maintaining a good relationship. It doesn't mean everything we advocate for we get, However, you know, the relationship is there, and that's important.
Thank you. So next question, right there.
Hello. First of all, we want to thank you so much for your leadership and tell you that we have 35 faith, business, neighborhood, and other community and justice groups that want to join from this area, your organization and effort. But we also have a question. Until the funding gets shifted, really away from highway widenings, which research show are actually ineffective after years 5, by year 5, definitely by year 10, usually by year 5. But until the funding is shifted and kind of opened up, do you really think that community-led planning is going to be possible or allowed to have much influence? It's much more common to, throw a bikeway along that segment or put in an expensive, pedestrian overpass. Jim Schroeder calls those pedestrian shade structures. So, thank you.
All right, I think I caught most of that. It sounds like it's centering around this question around the shift in how funding is being allocated being priority before we can really have some impact. So my response is in 2 parts. One is that we must transfer and activate ownership of the planning processes to the neighborhoods and shift resources. I'm not suggesting one or the other. Should you check out our Equiticity Racial Equity Statement of Principle, you will see embedded in that document the critical importance of distributing resources in a new fundamental way in our society, where the resources are going to the most marginalized among us. Oftentimes the way we think about resources as a sector, and this is not just true for transportation, is we just like to spread it around equally. Well, that does not reflect the commitment to racial equity or mobility justice. We're advocating for that the distribution of resources should be focused in a way that those who need the resources the most receive the most resources. Again, that's another tectonic shift away from our current way of operating transportation in our society. So what I'm suggesting is that we have to do both. I don't want to wait until there's this new way of distributing resources for Black and brown people to own the planning process for bringing bike lanes into our neighborhoods, because the way bike lanes are coming into our neighborhoods today is contributing to us not using those bike lanes. I want our culture to be reflected in those bike lanes, our history, our style. I want us to own them and know about it and understand it and be a part of the process that helped create these bike lanes. So I understand your point. However, we can't wait. We can't wait to do all of the different strategies and solutions that we want to implement. We have to do 2 things at the same time. We have to solve for the symptoms, and we have to treat the disease. We can't focus all of our attention on the disease, which is structural racism, and we can't focus all of our attention on the symptoms. I'm suggesting we have to do both.
We're going to get a...
Thank you again so much. We fully agree. No waiting. We cannot.
That's right. We're done waiting. We're done waiting. It's go time.
Hi, Lena Price, Area Higher Education Center. I also want to thank you for your work. My question is, how do you center your framework around students, elementary on up to higher education in your communities and different neighborhoods? Are you including the school transportation
departments with your framework? Are you at the schools? How are you getting kids involved from elementary on up to college?
All right, I think I caught that. How are we engaging young people, right?
And particularly school structures. So,
Yes.
you know, transportation systems organized around schools.
Sure. So I trust that you all probably already know this. However, I should say it. While we're about 5 years old now, we're still nascent. We're still growing, evolving organization. So, you know, we're limited by our capacity and our resources. That being said, the work we do with young people includes a few different things. On the program side, we have a program called Bike Force. It is a workforce development program targeting high school students here in North Lawndale, where our organization is based. And it's introducing young people to the technologies inside of an e-bike, battery, electric motor, drivetrain, gears, because e-bikes is the wave. It's coming, whether we like it or not. The wave of e-bikes is coming. Bike share systems are going to go all e-bike one day. The only bike share systems we'll have on the ground will be e-bikes, because it's the best opportunity for them to compete with e-scooters. So that's coming. Logistics and shipping companies are putting in the most densest of cities and in the most densest of central business districts, e-cargo bikes on the ground to make them more nimble and move around these dense cities and downtowns more effectively. So this wave is coming. And the technologies inside of an e-bike easily transfer to an e-scooter, an electric vehicle, electric charging station, autonomous vehicles. So we see this as the starting point to introducing young people to these technologies, and then over time, graduate their level of expertise. And as a result, create career opportunities for these young people, entrepreneurial opportunities, and or educational opportunities. We see it as a vehicle to introduce young people to the STEM fields. So that's one program called Bike Force. Another one is called One Lawndale Bike Team. So here in Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, I'm in a neighborhood called North Lawndale, predominantly Black, low to moderate income. The neighboring neighborhood is predominantly Mexican-American, also low to moderate income. And at the start of the pandemic, it was a lot of challenges between those two neighborhoods. You all may have heard about it on the news. When racial justice reckoning happened and uprising happened, gangs in North Lawndale who were Black went to war with gangs in Little Village, which is mostly Mexican-American. And it was really ugly. And organizations on both sides created this whole theme around One Lawndale, because there's North Lawndale and another name for Little Village is South Lawndale. So a whole theme around One Lawndale to reduce violence between the two neighborhoods. And our contribution to that is the One Lawndale Bike Team. So that program is up and running. It's at a high school that sits on the border of both neighborhoods. And we are teaching young people the basics of bicycle mechanics, doing group rides with them, helping them understand how to use the bicycle as a mode of travel, how to use the bicycle to bring neighborhoods together, and teach them also about racial equity and mobility justice. So that program is happening. And then the third program I'll mention that we do with young people is called our Squad Ride Management Training Program. So some of you all have ever ridden on a big ride. Sometimes this team is called ride marshals. We call them squad. Often you'll see a group of people in the front of the ride. They go to the intersection first, block the intersection so the ride is able to go through. Sometimes you'll see people on the left-hand side of the ride, keep the ride pushed to the right so that cars or people could travel back and forth without interacting with the ride. And then you'll usually see a team in the back with a lot of tools, equipment. That team is often called SAG. SAG stands for support and gear. Well, we train young people to be on that team with us. We train them, we compensate them, like on our Friday night ride here in North Lawndale, we got a squad team made up of young people that we've trained, and we compensate them for supporting our rides. And then sometimes we'll have a corporate partner who'll compensate them. And through our training, we then deploy them to help on other people's rides. We've been working with some of these young people here in North Lawndale for upwards of 3-4 years. I've sort of watched them evolve and become experts at managing a ride. And I remember when I was first working with them, they didn't even want to listen to what I was telling them to do. So it's been quite the transition. So those are the 3 things that we're doing with young people: Bike Force, One Lawndale Bike Team, and Squad Ride Management Training Program.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. I think Councilmember Black had a question.
Thank you. I love your bike tours and your walking tours. You also mentioned transit tours, and in Denver, we already had pretty low ridership, and COVID was devastating to transit, and we are not finding people coming back. So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So our public transit excursions, they haven't started yet. They start in June. Since we was founded, we were doing community bicycle rides. We started doing neighborhood walking tours about 2 years ago. This year, we're adding those additional 3: public transit excursions, group scooter rows, and open streets cyclovia style festivals. So our vision for our public transit excursions, one, we will focus on North Lawndale, so we want it to be neighborhood specific. And one idea we have is to work with an organization here in North Lawndale that is doing workforce development. So they're training people to go and get jobs, perhaps in job centers outside of the city. And should we have a concentration of people that are all wanting, because they got a new job, they're all wanting to figure out how to get there. And we know that transit is an option. Then on that tour, that public transit excursion tour, we will take the people that are affiliated with this organization and use transit to show them that they can use transit to get to their new job. That's one example. Another example, in Chicago, we have a beautiful lakefront. It's a gem of our city, dotted with beaches and this incredible natural areas. And there's one place along our lakefront called the Museum Campus. Some of you all may know it. The Chicago Bears football stadium is over there. The Field Museum, Shed Aquarium, Planetarium. It's a beautiful part of our city. I mean, it is amazing. And oftentimes what we find is that Black and brown people may not know about it, or in the event they know about it, they may not visit it often. And it's not easy to navigate to. It's like, it's on the lake. It's downtown Chicago. You gotta get off the expressway. You gotta get onto another expressway briefly to get to it. It's challenging to get to, and some people may not realize that you're able to use transit to get to the museum campus. So that's another idea, is showing people that you can use transit to get to a beautiful part of our city, like the museum campus. And then another idea we have is using transit to get to important destinations that impact life outcomes. That could be grocery stores, universities or schools, healthcare, hospitals, or healthcare facilities. Destinations that are critical to improving life outcomes for racially marginalized people are destinations that we want to show people transit is an option to get there.
So thank you very much, Mr. Reed. Really appreciate you being here on behalf of Transportation Solutions and everybody in the room. That was incredibly both educational and inspiring. So don't be a stranger. Come visit your family. I was not paid to say that.
Will do. I will certainly do that. And I look forward to crossing paths with you as I'm riding on the trails of Denver with my niece and nephews.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you all. Take care.
So right now, we're just gonna take a couple minutes break, let people chat among yourselves, get some more coffee and snacks, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. What does that make it? 10:35, say? Okay, 10:35, we back here for the next part.